who are going to share their experiences, their insights and experiences on the topic of looking after ourselves. So what do we mean by this? This event really came from a place of understanding that breaking into peace and security and your early years and experiences in this sector can be very challenging, especially for people of color. Jobs are competitive, early career positions in particular can be rare, and often there's an expectation to work without salary or work in precarious circumstances. At the same time, there's historic and ongoing issues of racism, sexism, and other discriminatory practices within the field. These can combine to make peace and security a difficult and challenging sector to break into and to start in. However, what we're hoping to do through this event is to allow people who have broken in, who've entered into the field, and perhaps have experienced some of these challenges to share their advice on how to navigate these difficult initial steps. And while doing so, to protect your mental and emotional health, to deal with issues like imposter syndrome and burnout, and how to, amongst all of this, maintain purpose in your work, especially as purpose and seeing working peace and security as having a meaningful or worthwhile purpose is, I think, something that motivates a lot of us in our initial interest in the field. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. So Cath Thompson is the Managing Director at the Peace and Security Funders Group, a global network of foundations and philanthropists that support a range of peace and security issues, including conflict and atrocities prevention, nuclear, climate and cybersecurity, transitional justice, women, peace and security, and beyond. Jessica Budlong is the founder of the Nuclear Fusion Project. She received her master's from the University of Denver and is a policy analyst with the Department of Treasury. Dr. Rachel Boveja is a multicultural health diplomacy consultant and wellness coach. In addition to consulting, Rachel is an adjunct professor at the Indiana University School of Public Health. Rachel's ongoing research informs her development of international refugee health education materials and trainings. Sadia Hameed is the founder and director of Thought Partnerships and has spent the last 20 years deeply engaged in field building through working strategically with a range of diverse human rights organizations, identifying and inviting new stakeholders into conversations. Sadia serves as a thought partner who seeks to identify and create opportunities, connections, and collaborations that help the global peace building and conflict prevention fields to thrive and grow. So thank you again to this wonderful panel of speakers. We really appreciate the time that you've given to speak with us today. We're going to dive directly into our first question. So relevant to any context, but especially during these times of working from home, I'm in my bedroom right now. Keeping a work-life balance is very important to keeping a healthy mind and body and to avoiding burnout. It's not uncommon, especially early in our careers, to feel like we need to overcompensate by working long days, checking emails outside of work hours, or even doing uncompensated labor. So what's your main advice for keeping a work-life balance, especially for those who may just be starting their first job position? And perhaps we could start with Cath and then go on to Sadia.
Sure, thanks so much for having me, for inviting me to this conversation that's very close to my heart. And I wish that we'd had these kinds of conversations when I was starting out in the field. Certainly, I think what came to my mind on this question is this quote from Annie Lamott, who said, "Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you." And I think that has been really difficult, if not impossible, over the past several years with just constant connection. And I feel like I especially have had such, like, I cannot keep my mind in one place at one time. Like, there's so much attention capture all the time. And our professional lives and our personal lives, our social lives have been connected to screens and just have been connected to these attention grabbing devices, but we need to set boundaries early and honor them. So this is something I didn't do when I was starting out in the field, and I experienced burnout just a few years into my career. But we really do need to unplug. Like a tech break once a week, a tech Sabbath is important. Turn off notifications, knowing that these tech companies are monetizing our attention and our outrage too. So the more outrageous and hard things are, the more clicks and then the more money they're making. So we need to like be aware of that fact and then create some distance. So I have found it to be helpful to have a conversation with my supervisors, laying out that I won't check email after 5 p.m. or I won't check email on the weekends or whatever, so they can't expect this from you, so that it has been already a two-way conversation with them on your boundaries. And then also, you know, there is a tendency for younger folks, and especially women of color, to do uncompensated labor and to pick up the tasks at work that might not be recognized. But it's useful to keep track of that if you're doing that at your job, and then present it as evidence within your own like performance reviews and conversations with your supervisors on the extra labor that you're picking up. And I'll stop there. I have more ideas, but I'll pass it to Sadia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Sorry, it took me a few minutes to join. And Cath, thanks for kicking off the reflections in this part. I mean, I can safely say that until I came to the leadership role that I'm in now, I worked in just about every kind of toxic environment that one could possibly imagine. And that I will say openly and freely that our field is not a model for work-life balance. It is very, very far from it. And whether that was as a young woman of color professional trying to get into the rooms and spaces and prove my worth, or when it was after my first child or my second child, nothing ever really expanded to feel like it met me as a person where I was. The expectation was always that whatever room I walked into or whatever table I sat around or whatever project I led, that the exact formulation of me needed to show up there that met the expectations of everybody else except for me. And that was most of my career. And I think about that now as I'm building thought partnerships and in a position to create an organizational culture that really does exist as its own little tiny bubble island in this big field. But when I was thinking about our culture and our policies, I thought about every time that I felt lesser than I ought to have, and decided to consciously create an environment and a culture that was going to counter that. I didn't want any of the young women who are going to come in and work on my team to have to experience that. And even though I can't change the entire field, I wanted them to come in and feel what it felt like to be recognized as your whole self and to exist that way and to get the tools and foundations they could take back out to the field so they could have healthy boundaries. They could earn what they're worth, and they could recognize that actually there is such a thing as work-life balance. I'd say one of the most important lessons I've learned for anyone, especially working in peace building and doing that globally, or in international context, is that there isn't a work-life separation. Most of the reason why people get drawn to do this work is because they feel passionately about causes that they're not just trying to transform for the benefit of other people out there, but that we've started to realize that we're as stakeholders for that change in our own lives. We've watched our country here in the United States go through tremendous pain points over the last many years. And I don't think that there's anyone out there who can say that those changes haven't affected every moment of our lives, from the moment we wake to the moment we sleep, and sometimes the nightmares we have at night too. And so that's the thing, is that one of the most important things for me was realizing that even trying to create the semblance of work-life balance didn't make sense. What I need to create, and what I hope I can invite others to seek to create, is just self-balance. It's not work and life. Work's a part of life. And the work we do tends to be a very big part of life, because you can't read a paper or watch a movie or have a conversation with somebody without some issue coming up that happens to be related to something that maybe you're trying to advocate on or transform or research, or challenge in the real world. And so I'd start with that. You start with yourself, and not just some part of yourself, not just the professional self, your whole self, every part of your mind, your body, your soul. What does it look like to be happy and whole and healthy in that self? If that means that you need a little bit extra time in the morning, but you're willing to put in work in the evening because that's your life right now and that's how you balance yourself, that's okay. We don't have anything remotely close to a 9 to 5. We have some core hours at Thought Partnerships where we overlap, and the rest of it is we make room for life. There is a sense of trust that actually, if you're allowed to meet your needs and be your whole self, that you will be optimized and accelerated to perform with excellence in a way that will actually harness all of your talents and unleash them back out into the world. And I fundamentally believe that. And if that means that my check-ins with my team are 50% therapy, 30% meditating, and 20% work tasks, then that's what we do. But I would say that I would challenge this idea of work-life balance, and I would just call people to think about self-balance and then what that means in life and how you exist and what your responsibilities might be in your life that go beyond yourself to your children or your parents or your partners or your employers, but that actually first you start by centering yourself and then you look at the rest of life and you find the balance across that.
I really love that. I feel like for people who come from marginalized backgrounds, sometimes the path to acceptance is seen as suppressing parts of yourself, but then that idea of self-balance is like acknowledging and like allowing you to bring your full self to your work. That's great, thank you. So our second question, it touches upon imposter syndrome, which is something that might be familiar to many of us here. It's not uncommon, especially when you're fresh out of school, to feel inadequate or underprepared when applying for positions and preparing for job interviews. So Rachel and Jessica, what advice would you give to our audience for managing their imposter syndrome early in their careers or while job searching? And how have you navigated imposter syndrome yourselves as you have kind of made your way through your careers? Perhaps we can start with Rachel, as I can see you're unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and good to see everyone here. I first just have to say that Cath and Sadia, I feel like you both already pointed on some of these things about imposter syndrome with boundaries, with expectations of others and versus expectations of ourselves. And I think for me, whenever I hear the terms imposter syndrome, I always think about what I'm being told, how I'm being told I need to show up. You know, whether it's a field that I'm breaking into that is primarily male dominated or primarily Caucasian, primarily something that I feel is not me, I always go into it trying to understand what is the dynamic already, what is the culture already. And sometimes when you do that, you can forget to remember why you started it in the first place and all that you have to bring to it. You know, you start to become what you see is already there versus what you are. And so I say it's very important, just like both of our previous speakers just mentioned, know who you are, know what your values are, know how to have boundaries when it comes to your expectations versus others' expectations. And I also feel like for me, in my personal experience, if you're anything like me, you may have a few career pivots, right? So when speaking of entry level and job searching, I've done that a few times throughout my career, you know, after completing a couple of my degrees. So, and in different fields as well. And so every place has a different dynamic and a different culture and different expectations. With that, again, you have to have this thread of always understanding who you are at your core and how you want to best bring that to the table. Despite appearances and despite what it may seem when you arrive, you are there because you are adding value, right? So you always want to remember that. And I can give an example of some of my experiences. I remember just even in school, graduate school, and in certain positions that I've had, I was told from the very beginning how to dress, how to speak, how to operate, how to engage. You know, I was always told how I needed to show up. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it was not natural to my core values. It was not value aligned with me. So when trying to understand how you fit in, should you fit in, and what you need to do, remember that imposter syndrome is something that you want to remember who you are at your core, and that at the end of the day, when you leave your office, when you leave your meetings, when you leave just a simple conversation with someone you're working with, you want to be proud of who you were and how you left things, not so proud of how they wanted you to do it, right? Because you're there to add value, contribute, and show up as, you know, our previous speaker said, as your full self, you know? So, yes.
All right, well, thank you for having me as well. And I'm going to hit on a lot of points that Rachel just said. And so personally, I definitely felt and continue to feel imposter syndrome. I'm almost always the youngest person in the room, no matter where I go, no matter what I'm doing, grad school, undergrad, panels like this. It's great. But you also get imposter syndrome. But the fact that I'm even in the room is reason enough for me to feel confident. And I think that's exactly what Rachel just said. You are there for a reason. So you're rarely going to be in a place that you don't belong, because if you've made it there already, you've done something right. And I think really internalizing that and saying, I'm here for a reason. If I'm not here, that's fine too. But also if I'm here for a reason. I think this goes for job application and interviews for those breaking into the fields. Just apply and put your name out there. Sometimes it's hard to do. You might not see, 4 out of 5, you might hit 4 boxes out of 5. Apply anyways. And when you get an interview, be confident in yourself, because they wouldn't interview you if they didn't see your ability to do the job already. A wise person once told me, don't count yourself out of a job you haven't been offered. AK, it's always a no if you don't apply. If you don't apply, guaranteed no, you're not going to get the job. If you at least put your name out there, maybe you don't get it the first time, maybe you don't get it the second time, you could get it the third time. They keep resume on file, you can get hired even after the fact. And we're talking about being in the room once you're there. If you walk in with your head up and aren't afraid to speak up, even if you're wrong, even if you're nervous, even if you think you're asking the dumb questions, those questions are often the best ones. They're the ones that nobody else is thinking about. They're the ones that everybody else has brushed aside, and you're bringing it up, and you can save a lot of issues in the future. And you're also going to walk away feeling less like an imposter because you spoke up. You weren't just sitting in the back, crowding out, quiet, being like, I don't belong here. No, you're there. You belong there. And so it's not bad to feel imposter syndrome, but let it drive you. And the more that you hide that feeling from people around you, they don't know that you're nervous. You're the only one feeling that way. I mean, others are probably feeling it too, but no one else knows that that's how you're feeling. Have somebody you can confide in and say, hey, I'm really nervous about this. How do you go about it? And then walk into the room with your head up. And so it only gets easier the more you do it. The more experience, the more you're able to brush that aside, be in those rooms that you feel like you don't belong in, prove your worth, be your whole self like everyone else said. There's no magic formula. Everybody gets imposter syndrome, but I think just really finding a way to tame it and use it instead of something that weighs you down is really important. So thank you.
Thank you. I feel like this has been so insightful so far. And it's brilliant how everyone's ideas, I think, are really connecting with each other, and you see these common threads, like allowing yourself to be yourself and recognize your value, and how that kind of self-acknowledgement and priority is helpful for navigating some of these issues. Moving now, kind of talking to kind of more like specific or kind of practical ways of dealing with some issues that we may face when entering into the peace and security field, so widely defined. Creating habits and staying well can sometimes take practice and time. And so to all our panelists, what kind of mental health and wellness practices have you adapted or developed for yourself? And how have they helped you have a happy and healthy headspace when dealing with some of these issues? And perhaps we can start with Cath, shall we say?
Sure. Yeah. I've learned for myself and seen from other folks that, work, especially work in the peace and security field, can take up everything in your life. Work expands to fit all your time if you let it. And like Sadia was saying, like, there is no work-life balance. So I love the concept of self-balance, and haven't really thought about it that way, Sadia, but I learned in the past several years that, like, you need to carve the time, because it's not going to be carved out for you. So whether that means, taking a real lunch break and actually savoring your lunch and making that sacred time, or, turning off your notifications at 5 p.m. or whatever it needs to be, and understanding that, like, I need to set a precedence early of carving time for me. So for me, that means to start out my day well is really important to me. And that has been a lot harder having a baby in the past years and a half. But I've carried with me a near daily practice of contemplation, prayer and meditation. And for me, it helps me to focus by writing. So I do that almost every day for nearly 20 years. That I've carried that with me through all the different places I've lived and all the situations I've been in. So that's been helpful. And there's a very famous book in the trauma healing space called The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk, and he writes about how trauma and stress generally is, we tend to like try to intellectualize it, but we need to also feel it in our bodies. And I feel like the working world makes us live in our heads so much, and we forget that we are also a body that we need to take care of. And there are certain practices that help us attend to that, as simple as breathing. Before my work at PSFG and sort of in a different iteration of my earlier life, I founded a program where I taught therapeutic cooking classes to survivors of trauma and conflict and grief. And that act of cooking is both a radical act and a sacred act, I think, and it helps people connect to their bodies. And then I facilitated conversations around the table. So I'm biased, but I think that if you don't know how to cook, that is one avenue to be able to bolster both your physical and your mental wellness and well-being. But that's just one example of the things that you can carve out in your life to be able to understand yourself as a whole person, and to keep sacred that which makes you come alive.
Perhaps now we could go to Sadia.
Sorry, finding my unmute. Thank you. So I suppose there's a few things that I would say in this regard, some sort of like really practical tools and approaches, and then some things that I think are a mindset. So I forget who says this quote, but I think about it often, which is, the night sky would be so dark if there was only one star shining at a time. And for me, that's really important for two reasons. The first is that oftentimes as young professionals, or even as women 20 years into your career, you're not really sure if you can shine as bright as you want to, because you've been made to feel very self-conscious about where your talents belong in place to your peers and your counterparts, and how ready or not ready someone might be for you if you happen to have new ideas or a different perspective, or not be from quite the same beat as everybody else that has traditionally been at an institution. And I would say that actually, you need to shine as bright as you can, because that's your talent and your potential and what you're bringing to the table. And you might experience workplaces that are not comfortable with that, and that probably means it's not the right workplace for you, and there will be one that will be right for you, and you shouldn't feel afraid to keep going till you find it. The second, about the idea of lots of stars shining together, is this idea of community and solidarity and nourishing each other. And the idea that we work in a field that has for so many decades prioritized hierarchy and competition, rather than actually recognizing that the issues that we're trying to surmount cannot be done by any individual or any institution on their own. It only happens when you have people who are collectively working towards a purpose with aligned values with one another, as strong as each other, or lifting each other, that allows for that kind of change to happen. So you want to see yourself as one of many stars in the sky. You don't want to have to shine alone. The other thing that I love when it comes to thinking about when to step forward and to take on more, and when to ask for a break and to step back, is why birds fly in a V. I've always been fascinated with birds in general, but birds fly in a V because someone is leading. And when that leader gets tired, that bird moves all the way to the back, one side of the V, and one of the birds at the front comes forward. And I love that too, because again, the kind of change we're trying to create is a marathon. It's lifelong, it's intergenerational, it's beyond our lifetime, which means you always want to be a bird in a V. You don't want to be that bird trying to migrate on your own, honestly. And so this idea of community, of nourishment, of solidarity, of supporting each other, of rising together, of picking someone up and knowing that you'll be supported too, like I can't express that enough. Because oftentimes we can find ourselves on teams or in environments that feel very different. And I welcome everybody to start shifting and changing that, and actually trying to create space for it to be very different in your teams and in your workplaces. The excellence of one person does not diminish your excellence at all. Your need for rest and help does not mean that you are not competent. All of these things are about understanding how we actually find that balance and optimize ourselves fully. And sometimes we will go hard and sometimes we need to go a little bit slower, and all of that is perfectly fine. As far as daily practices or weekly practices that I find really helpful, one is at the end of every day, sort of checking in with myself, and going deep into my gut and asking myself honestly, how do I feel right now? And how do I think I did today? Because every single morning is a chance for a reset. You don't have to wait for a vacation or a new job or something else. You can literally the next morning when you rise, that is an opportunity for a reset. So when you check in with yourself at the end of that evening and you think, I'm tired or I'm energized or I'm feeling despondent or I'm inspired, think about what were the things I did today? Like how did I balance myself through all of my different obligations today? How did I focus on myself today? What did I do? I also think that sort of, when it comes to your work day, your work hours, how you're balancing that with the other things you want. It's kind of a very American thing to do. My South Asian family makes a lot of fun of me for this, but like, if you look at my calendar, it is like a color coded Rubik's Cube. And the reason for that is that I put on my calendar everything when I'm dropping my kids off to school and when I'm picking them up. So that if you want something from me during that time, you're not going to get it because mom hat is going to be on and Edie hat's going to be somewhere at the bottom of my bag. And that's just how it's going to be. But I'm going to signpost that for everyone. And I welcome my team to signpost that back for me because that's real life. Pickup time at school doesn't change no matter where you're working. Similarly, lunchtime, exercise time, all those things. And we color code them even by colors that represent something you're doing with your team, something you're doing external from your team, something you're doing for yourself, something that is an obligation that can't be removed. And that tells us also that if we're seeking flexibility from one another, where in that Rubik's Cube of color can we ask for a little bit more, or can we compromise if we need to? And it's complicated and it takes a lot of work, but it's actually well worth the effort at the end of it. Because what you have then is a team of people who feel seen, heard, and able to meet all of the things in life that they want to while checking in with themselves, hopefully at the end of the day, and feeling pretty good about it rather than feeling exhausted and tired. I also think that I recommend everybody, and I've done this since very early in my career, take a week off every quarter, at least, or at least a long weekend. Make it a habit. Your vacation is not there to lose at the end of the year. It's given to you for a reason. So actually use it and take it. And I know the pandemic has made that hard, but as things open back up again, think about what that is and actually plan for it and use it. And we institute things like self-reflection time and self-retreats. We don't work officially on Fridays. Everyone gets paid for Fridays, but Fridays are called My Day Fridays. And that's because a lot of things that you need to do to take care of yourself as a person actually happen between Monday and Friday from 9 to 5, like needing to see a doctor or a dentist or pick up your laundry or drop off your dry cleaning, whatever that might be. And so a My Day Friday is the idea that before you get to the weekend, which might be your time off or your family time or your playtime, and that week where you've dedicated a very large proportion of yourself to the work that you do professionally, that there's actually a day that's just for yourself. You go get your nails done, get your hair cut, go to the dentist, pick up your dog food, whatever it is that you need to do. And that's a fully compensated day, that we're not expecting you to be available for meetings, but that there's an expectation that when that Friday comes to a close, everything you committed to doing that week gets done. Now, if you get that done on Wednesday, that is amazing. If you need to get that done, after hours on Friday, that's okay too. The point is that there's a flexibility and a trust built in there. And I think that as you go through each of your jobs and positions, what you're going to learn is what your rhythm is. So you have a rhythm of how you can be optimized, and it's not going to be the same rhythm as everyone else who works with you. And that's okay. But when you understand your own rhythm and you start to pay attention to it, you can be better at going to your supervisors and asking for things that will allow you to operate during those times and hours, or in the ways that actually optimize you. And when you're optimized, usually that means that you can produce excellent work in a fraction of the time because you're being very efficient, rather than the times we all have where we're sitting in front of a computer and I type the same line over and over again 30 times, probably because I'm hungry and I'm tired or something else has happened. So those are some of the things that I encourage that are, they're at your fingertips. They're in front of you. Every time you open up your work calendar to join a meeting, you can see what your day looks like. If your day is all like, I don't know, red and orange, and there's like no light pink in there, then maybe that's saying that you actually didn't build yourself into your own day. And you have to, because I think it might have been Cath who said this, like, no one else is going to actually do that for you. You're going to have to ask for your time and space yourself.
Thank you. That was great. I especially love the emphasis you place on like community over like individualism, as I feel like sometimes like the way building an early career is presented is like you have to be like the most shining star and be like superior or the best, when at the end of the day, like you are existing in a community of people with similar values and goals, and so it shouldn't just be reduced to competition. Perhaps we go now to Rachel and then to Jessica on this question, and as well just to encourage the audience to submit questions via the question and answers function. So it's the middle box there at the bottom for you.
Yes, thank you. I enjoyed listening to both of your responses. Wow, because I'm learning so much from these panels as well. And that's one thing I would say is great for my wellness, is just listening and hearing other people's stories, and hearing what I may be able to do differently. But I wanted to say one of my biggest joys in life is teaching. And when I'm not working with refugees or working on some research or policy, I love talking with students who have yet to join the work field, and they're already stressed out, right? How they're managing their time just in college or graduate school, and just wondering how they're going to make it in this space. And so one of the things I like to do is get them thinking about, as you all said before, some things you can start to implement in your life that will take you beyond college, right? I am also a huge planner. There's some more stories about that too, but I'm a huge planner. So I have things written down on notepads, my agenda in my phone, so digitally, pen to paper. Does everything always work out the way I planned it? No. So if you're anything like me, I also agree that since we like to self-manage ourselves, and sometimes we need to self-manage ourselves, especially with all of the things that we're doing, make sure you do have that space, just like you plan for exercise, you plan for when you're going to be at work, you plan for when you're going to be with family, you plan for when you're going to be with friends. You also need to put in there what you're going to do for yourself, just as you would everything else, right? Of course, and unfortunately, we live in a society that, it does promote working and overworking and, always putting ourselves to the side. But as you all know and have heard before, we can't pour from an empty cup, right? We must take care of ourselves. And some of you may have already seen what has happened if we're not taking care of ourselves. And then we try to do all those things with work, family, friends. So make sure you're at the beginning of your day. So I'll give an example for what has worked for me, what my rhythm has been, I guess I should say. When I wake up in the morning, I cannot jump into the shower, start my day without me just sitting with myself before I even get out of bed. So this is in my own mind. Nobody has to hear this. And just checking in on myself. How are you feeling? I like to do gratitude rituals as well. So just naming things that I'm grateful for, which that list is endless if you even start those lists, right? But I do that before I get out of bed, because as someone who likes to plan, I'm already a little bit anxious about what's going on through the day. So the first thing I have to do is calm myself down, let myself know that if I don't get everything done today, that's quite all right. It is not the end of the world, because we are often most hardest on ourselves than people realize, and that, harder than what we think is actually going on out in the world. The other thing I would say, particularly in my field, working with refugees. So I'm a planner, right? Refugee crises and situations do not happen along my plan, ever. Right? And many things that we do in our field, it doesn't work that way. So you have to pivot, you have to learn how to adapt to every situation. But what I say with that is, as passionate as we all are about the work that we do, when we're working in situations where they're surrounded by trauma, that can impact you, That doesn't mean that you can't do your work, but you want to be mindful of the fact that you are feeling those things naturally, and you want to be able to take care of yourself and just give yourself radical honesty when something may be too much for you, or you need to take a break, or you need to do something for yourself so that you can continue to help in some of those traumatic situations. And I say that for anyone who's like counseling, teaching, therapy, like I said, working with any traumatic situation. And I would say also that body cues are everything. Your body is often telling you when something's wrong long before it gets really bad. I don't like to admit this, but even as a health practitioner, when I was younger, I didn't always listen, and it didn't turn out well when I didn't. So sometimes when you feel that little itch in your body, or if you feel tired and you don't think you should, take a nap, lay down, sit down, right? Listen to your body, because your body may be telling you something that you don't realize, because we're in our heads too much. So those are just a few of the things that I would say, and breathing. I know when we were young, some of you may have heard, when you've been really upset, someone comes up to you and says, just take a deep breath, while you're crying or you're upset, when they tell kids that, that's true for all of us in everything that we do as well. Breathing, breath is life. And just taking simple deep breaths when you're feeling anxious, when you're going through imposter syndrome, when you're going through changes in work, when you are handling almost impossible tasks, take some deep breaths. It takes a lot to maybe sit and do that, but it makes a huge, huge difference in how you're going to move forward. Thank you.
I absolutely love that we all can have different points on this, but I'm going to echo a few that other people have made. So my first point is going to echo Sadia. My view on mental health is also, we need to set priorities each month and every few months. And it can look different based on what's happening in your life and what's going on in the world. So some months, maybe work is the priority and that is your focus. You need to finish a deadline, you need to finish a project. But then other times it might be all about your family. So during the holidays, maybe work takes a backseat and you really want to focus on the time that you're spending with yourself and your family. Or maybe it's your hobbies. If you are doing rock climbing, maybe in the summer, that's your whole priority. You want to make sure you can work remotely, go do your thing, come back to work, and then make it a priority later. So building your life around these priorities, making sure you block out your time. I think people have said this before. You have to make the time that you want. So have clear no work zones and no compromise zones. I love the different calendars, Sadia. I color code everything and definitely going to do that more in the calendar. So for me, I never work on Saturdays. I started this going to grad school because I already burned myself out. I was so overwhelmed with everything going on. And I was like, I cannot work on Saturdays. That is my day to do nothing. I will not answer messages. I will not respond. I will not do anything. I will lay in bed and take a nap all day. That is my plan. I will do nothing else. I will not do school, anything. And so creating whatever that means for you. Maybe that's after 5 p.m. Maybe that's before 9 a.m. Also value your mornings. Block out that time in the morning. Don't go on Twitter until 9 a.m. until you start your day. I think that was one thing I definitely learned the hard way. So just building out time for yourself and have a dedicated day or dedicated times where you're doing nothing else. Nothing get in the way. No one can take that time. I know for me recently, very concrete examples. I recently got back into a workout routine, which has taken me 2 years. Again, I kept putting it off. I'm going to do it when I get settled here. I'm going to do it when I finish this job. I'm going to do it when I get my full-time job. No, you just got to do it. Do whatever it is. And I think part of that is also just having a routine of some sort. At least for me, routines are so important. It sounds like, Rachel, you're the same way. Having something I'm going to do this and this and this. And so maybe that's going for a walk, which is always easier said than done. Find an adult coloring book or a kid's coloring book, take some time every single day. Maybe it's 8 p.m. at night after dinner. I'm going to spend 10 minutes doing this. I'm going to spend 10 minutes doing yoga. I'm going to go for a walk. But I found that doing the same thing for a short amount of time every single day is so incredibly useful and powerful to get your mind right. Maybe that's, in the morning when you get up, Rachel, you talk to yourself, think in your mind, get yourself settled. And the last thing I'll say on this is also just accept that you can't do it all. I finally accepted I can't do it all. My personal life and mental health definitely took a hit last year trying to do it all, trying to be in grad school, start a nonprofit, do full-time jobs, do part-time jobs. It's too much. You can't do it. And so really prioritize yourself in your own life. And so for me, I'm making sure I'm putting myself first going forward. I've pretty much gone quiet on nuclear fusion projects. So sorry to anybody on the line that's been wondering. Definitely burned myself out very quickly. And so I just wanted to get myself back into this space of being ready and being prepared for the next step and being excited about it instead of being like, oh my gosh, I have to go do what again? Still gonna learn how to delegate, but taking the pressure off of myself to do everything has been tremendously helpful. So if anything, I hope you take away, just block out your time, get some sort of routine if you can, do something every single day, and just don't expect yourself to do everything. Take a breath, take a day to yourself. You can't do it all.
Brilliant. Thank you, all of you. Moving now to some of the audience questions. There's two that I think touch upon quite a similar theme of having intentions to do things like set boundaries, but being unable to, or perceiving yourself to be unable to because of your circumstances. So one person has asked, what do you do if you are stuck in a situation where your supervisor or colleagues don't respect your time, even after you tried to set boundaries? And then we also have the question of, and then the asker has included their personal experience, and they said, early in my career, I found myself in a situation where the only job options available to me were ones in toxic environments. I didn't have the financial flexibility to pick and choose or to wait for a better position to become available. And I felt that I had to endure these workspaces that were detrimental to my mental health and self-worth. How would you recommend people starting out to navigate these situations?
If I can jump in, I think Sadia is maybe answering the question online too, but if I can jump in really quickly about the toxic work opportunities that are the only ones that are available. I personally went through that, and many people who've met me can say that like I'm an eternal optimist. Like I'm always trying to find the good things in everything that I'm doing and everybody whom I meet. Sometimes to my detriment. And I was in a work situation where I actually had to leave the position because my partner was noticing, again, where I wasn't paying attention to my body. He's just like, every day that you come home, you are just depleted, but not in a way that I'm tired, but in that like my soul was like being sucked out or something. And when I was in that position, I noticed that it was toxic the very first week I was in the position. I started making note of it. I didn't feel comfortable to say something about it right away, but then it started impacting my work. When I decided to reach out to my supervisor, I had a really negative response. When I reached out to our supervisor above that, had another negative response. I ended up crying in the office of that supervisor, not because of anything that had happened that day, but I just felt so defeated, unsupported, and I didn't know the right thing to do to get out of that toxic situation. Again, with the expectations of others in the society, is it right for me to leave a toxic situation? Is it responsible for me to leave this job just because it's a toxic situation? My advice is it is, because it's going to impact your work negatively. You're not going to be able to do what you need to do. And so for those of you, if you are looking at situations and you're only finding that you have toxic work opportunities available to you, my best advice is to ask as many questions as possible to everyone involved. You may be in situations where you have interviews with one person, several people, and maybe have multiple interviews. Ask as many questions about the culture of the workplace as possible. If possible, talk with people who may have previously worked there. It's going to be really good to get some like radical honesty about the work environment, the work that's going to happen, because the part that I had the most difficulty with was I wanted to do meaningful work. And that's why I chose the position. I was no longer able to do that because of the toxic situation. And the moment that I left, I felt a ton better, even though I didn't have all the answers about what I was going to do afterwards. So it's okay. And guess what? Things ended up working out just fine, right? So I think for me, that goes back to, if all you're seeing is toxic situations, I don't want you to feel like you have to sacrifice your integrity and your value system because nothing else is available right now, right? Trust your gut, ask a lot of questions, know that if you do choose that, you may end up, sacrificing your well-being as a result and leaving anyway. So do what you can on the front end to make sure that's the right position for you. Don't feel bad at all if it's not.
Thank you, Rachel. That was excellent. Would anyone else like to add anything, or we can move on to the next question?
Maybe just, and I did type an answer that hopefully everyone's able to see. But what I would say is that, I also recognize that right now the pandemic has made the job market very difficult. So it was difficult before, but it's really, really uncertain right now. And financial stability is a real thing. I'm a single mother with 2 young children. The idea of not having a job is just not a possibility. And I often think to myself, what would I be willing to do or go back to in order to take care of them? And the answer usually is, whatever I would have to. And so the question becomes, how do you find some tools and sort of resource and resilience within yourself that allows you to create a separation between yourself and the toxic environment, such that for the time that you need to exist within it, you can still energetically protect yourself from having to absorb all of the toxicity that comes from other people. I would say right now, even though I know it's hard to work from home, the fact that you can have some separation, perhaps from being in the physical presence of those people or being in that work environment, use that to your advantage. Only answer the things that you have to. Don't allow yourself to be available. I mean, I know it's a really scary thing to do, but I worked at an organization once where I had insomnia, I couldn't sleep. And so therefore at 3 a.m. when the head boss was texting, I was awake to reply, and I did. And then I thought, well, now he knows I'm awake late at night, so now he's going to keep doing that. Whereas if I had just sort of like stopped myself, frankly, from doing it, then it would have been like, why didn't you answer 3 a.m.? Because I'm sleeping. Why weren't you? Right. And so I know that it can feel frightening and scary, and that you can feel like you're replaceable. And the truth is that we're taught that we're all replaceable, right? Like I worked into a very prestigious organization, and it's the first thing they told me, you're replaceable. Just remember that. And I thought, all right, good to know where I stand. And if that's true, then why on earth would you destroy yourself in the process? It's not worth it. And so if you need to be where you are, trust that you can still deliver well, but protect yourself. Say no. Don't reply to something if it is abusing the boundary of a time when you're not meant to be reasonably expected to be available for work. Keep the energy out. I mean, there are actual practices and mantras and even meditations that you can say that allow you to move through your day in a way that like allows people to bounce their energy back. So one of the ones that I like, and I understand this is really woo, but I have no problem being woo. So here we go. It was taught to me when I was going through a very traumatic experience, not related to work. But that's, you walk in the morning when you wake up, you imagine yourself, just, it could be a tent, it can be a cloak, it can be a jacket, it can just be like your aura around you, but you imagine that it's made up of thousands of magnificent mirrors. And what you say as you move through your day, or if you're working in a toxic environment before you start that first engagement of the day, is you say, today I reflect back to the people with love and forgiveness all negativity that they send to me. And you don't accept it. You can find a way to politely answer it, you can deliver the task, but you don't take the energy, because that's what starts to undo your self-worth. That's what makes you feel like you are just there for everybody else and their convenience, and that you have no value in and of yourself. And that part, I would say 100% no to. And as early as you can start that, the more it will become a habit, and the more you will realize that you're not going to let yourself show up in any other way than what actually serves your life purpose and allows you to exist as your best possible self.
I can visually see a lot of nodding from that, and I feel like there's a lot of nodding probably happening in our audience. Perhaps for the benefit of people watching the recording, we might look at a question that I can see Jessica and Sadia have answered in text. So the question is, how do you navigate networking in your early career? Sometimes it can feel so intimidating. How do you communicate and present your value to people in a networking setting? And how has that changed with virtual work? So perhaps we could start with you, Jessica.
Great. Yes, I love this question. I'll try to answer it briefly with 2 key points. So the networking is kind of like a snowball. It's tough at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. You start building the network and you talk to more and more people, and they're easier to connect you with people. So it really can grow organically once you get past that first networking session, I guess, especially if it's intimidating. But just have a clear goal of what you want to accomplish. It can be something as small as really just wanting to talk to somebody else in the field, get a sense of what their organization is like and what they've done in their life. Probably don't go into it thinking you're going to get me a job, right? Start with something small, manageable, and that also builds your own self-confidence. Oh, that conversation went really great. I got X out of this, which is what I wanted. Now I can go into the next conversation to get X and Y. So it really just builds. And then the second point I would say is remember it's quality over quantity. And I think especially in this virtual space, there's so much pressure to go to every event, go to every conference. I want my name as a participant, as a person there. I want to ask questions. That doesn't value your own time or your mental health. I'm terrible with conferences. I do not go to a single conference because I cannot sit there and pay attention and listen and get as much out of it as if I just had one conversation with somebody and asked them those questions. And so I think figuring out what is going to value your time and value the people you're talking to. Finding one person that will champion you and bring you forward and pull you with them during their career will be way more valuable than trying to talk with 20 random people who you're never going to talk to again. And so I think coming back to that, setting boundaries and just figuring out what exactly do I need in this moment? Is it one person or is it 5? And just value your time and make the most out of the connections by not just doing quantity. Focus on the quality of the connections and the quality of the person you're talking to.
Can I just say one thing about networking that has served me, and I now pass it on to fellows and mentees I work with, is that like you have something to give in terms of networking. And if you think of networking as an extractive exercise where you just are hustling and just trying to build up your Rolodex of contacts, then we're not building the community that Sadia was talking about before. But one thing I found helpful is to like keep in a folder or something, articles I read or podcasts I listen to, and keep them in mind for folks who I might not have spoken to in a while, but it's an opportunity to reach out and say, hey, I was listening to this podcast and it really made me think of you. Hope you're well. And you're not asking for anything and you're not asking for a letter of recommendation or whatever, but it's that you're maintaining these relationships with people, especially now, who you might not bump into at a conference and have a side conversation with. But understanding that you have something to give, like I just published this piece or my organization just did this thing. And like, I wanted to highlight it for you because I thought you'd enjoy it. And I'm not asking for anything in return. And I think that's a healthy way to look at networking and has been a really fun way for me to learn about things from other people that I wouldn't otherwise have learned.
I think that's a brilliant piece of advice. Definitely. And Sadia, would you like to?
Just the last thing I'll add, when you're networking, oftentimes you're really focused on who's in the room, what your credentials are, and how you can best present your knowledge and your skill and your experience. And when you're doing that, just don't forget yourself. Actually, you're the most important part of that, because anybody can have a certain level of knowledge and skill and experience, but not everybody is going to be you. And I would say that actually fit with organizational culture, for me, was one of the leading metrics that were used during performance reviews and evaluations or future recruitments to determine how you look beyond the credentials on a CV and actually think about who is going to want to stay and be of service, or who is going to contribute and be part of a team or an institution or a mission over the longer term. So always remember to be yourself, because people will remember that. They won't just remember where you went to school and what you graduated with. They'll remember, like, you know, if you made them laugh. They'll remember if you shared something about yourself that makes you memorable to them. They'll remember, oh, you know, like that person was just like, had a really great vibe about them. Like, I know that that sounds a little bit untangible, but actually it really matters. Like, you matter. Like, you don't just want them to want you, like buying a book off of a shelf. Like, you matter. And so always bring yourself to that. And even if it doesn't yield immediate results at that time, when you bring yourself and you're remembered by even one of those 50 people that you meet that day, you never know down the road when your name's going to come up, or when you might find an email or someone reaching out or something on LinkedIn saying, you know what, if you're still looking, I saw this and I thought it might be a good fit for you. You never know. Universe works in magical and crazy ways, usually not in straight lines at all. But don't forget yourself. If you're not there, then what's the point?
Brilliant, thank you. So we only have a few more minutes left, but perhaps we could finish maybe with 30 seconds to each panelist on a question that I think will end things on a positive note. So the question is, how do you remind yourself that work in this field is important, even when things are difficult? What keeps you going? And perhaps we can start with Rachel, as I can see you've typed out an answer.
Oh, yes. So I typed my answer in there. For me personally, I actually do this with everything. I just remember why I started the journey in the first place and how it connects to my passions. And yes, sometimes your passions will change, but in each difficult situation, you definitely learn. You learn from it. You learn from the people, you learn from the circumstances, and sometimes you're learning who you don't want to be. You're learning how you don't want to operate, right? And those are skills as well, right? So take these situations when they're difficult, remember why you're doing it, and find ways to pivot in the best way to make sure you are still aligned with what you set out to do, right? So whether that means you need to change teams, jobs, situations, learn from the situation as you move forward. Everything's a lesson, and everything's a step towards your ultimate goal.
I think to piggyback on what Rachel just said, that last part, and just remembering everything is a stepping stone. You can take something away from everything that you do, whether it's the soft skills of leadership, learning how to communicate. Maybe it's the hard skills of like, I learned how to write this policy memo or this essay. Every single thing, you can just take away something from it and build yourself up, whether it's in the same field, whether it's something different career path entirely. Just taking those lessons, the little ones, the big ones, the hard ones, all of them, and just saying, I'm going to grow from this, and I'm going to grow into something else, into someone else that I want to be. I'm going to create new values from it. And I think that's really the best thing you can take away from those experiences, and especially when it gets tough.
I was going to say the word values. Exactly. My husband and I recently had to make a big decision, and we were going back and forth and back and forth. There were pros and cons on both sides, and it like wasn't an equal, we couldn't figure it out. And we had to take a step back and say like, okay, what are our values as individuals and as a family? And which of these decisions allows us to live into those values the best? And then the decision became clear. But we actually had to step back and articulate that again, actually refresh those values. So if you've never actually articulated, written out 3 to 5 values, or like a mission statement, some people like write their own mission statements, that is the touchstone for you of like whether to go to grad school or take a new job or X or Y or Z, move to a new place. Like maybe your value is financial stability, maybe your value is adventure. And like based on those values, you would make different decisions. So when you're going to be faced with questions of like, do I stay in the field or not? That's one approach you can take.
I think that I would just piggyback off of that sense of values, which is, you know your own North Star. When I have a hard time figuring out why I'm still working in this field, and when I think everything feels insurmountable and that I might very well shred myself in the process of trying to make a change, and why on earth is this worth it? I ask myself usually, if I'm not here tomorrow, what do I want to be remembered for? And that's everything, every part of me. I want to be remembered for being a great mom who showed up and who was present. I want to be remembered for being the friend who was there, even when I was in pain, that I found the space for others. I want to be remembered not just for the work I did, but the way people felt about working with me and how much that inspired them to want to seek out the best for themselves. I want to be remembered for creating change that does positively impact my life along with everybody else's, but to do that with a sense of compassion and inclusion and humility that I don't know everything. I've often never wanted to be a leader, which is ironic when you then find yourself being considered one. And then just kind of like Cass said, how do you organize your life in a way that allows you to meet those values? Did I have the value when I was 22 and didn't have any children to be a great mom? No, but now at 40 with 2 young kids that I care for on my own, it does, which means that that's going to change through your career and your life. You're not a static person. So you need to be checking in with that. Sometimes you're going to find yourself very different to where you started off, and those dreams and ambitions you had about who you want to be and how you want to show up in the world or the change you want to create, not going to look the same 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. And that's 100% okay, because this journey through life is actually yours, and how you want to feel fulfilled and be remembered is also your legacy to create. And so you get to be the master author, sort of, of that, and to create that blueprint. But being honest with yourself and then allowing yourself to make the choices that allow you to then live in those values, even if it means giving up that executive job or that salary or that toxic environment that feels like the right step from like a CV perspective, but doesn't actually speak to your soul, that's okay. And that's probably the right decision, because wherever you're meant to get to in life, I actually 100% believe you'll get there. But I also don't think that there's one road to get there. I think there's lots of different roads. And I think who you are and where you are and what your priorities are should always be the guiding light of what you do. And as long as it feels right to you, like right down there in your gut, then you can't go wrong.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time and insight in today's event. It's been so illuminating, and I can see from the chat very helpful to everyone who has been joining. And thank you to our participants for coming along as well and for your very thoughtful questions. I hope everyone has a good afternoon or evening, depending where you are. And yeah, thank you again. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.